One of the things that was really emphasized was 1 Peter 3:15, which says, "But in your hearts honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you, yet do it with gentleness and respect." So it was one of those things we were just really encouraged to all the time be ready to share our testimony. One of the days we actually took the whole morning and we blocked it out and we had an evangelism class, and it was kind of a step-by-step how to write your testimony and like really good passages for how to share your faith. And so after that we went out to the fish market, which was really stinky, to put that into practice. So we had been working on our testimonies all week and writing them out, and we were going house to house. And one house-to-house visit, I was in this group, but I wasn't. I wasn't part of the people sharing, but we were standing outside of these people's gates, and it was just really amazing because they were all so polite, and sometimes you could tell they really didn't want to hear what they had to say, but they listened anyways because they didn't want to be rude. So that was a really great opportunity. But we were talking to. It was this man and his daughter, and then his son was there too. And his daughter went to the Catholic Church pretty faithfully, but he said that he knew he wasn't right with God, but that was okay. He'd take care of it someday. But she was saying like she really wanted to know. So someone shared their testimony, and we shared the gospel with her, and she wanted to make a confession of faith. And it was just amazing to me because her dad is kind of sitting there laughing at her, and her brother is sitting there laughing at her, and especially in that culture that's very male dominant, it was very just encouraging to me. Like she didn't care, she wanted to hear. And so we prayed with her, and we got down her address because she didn't have a Bible, and I think the church was getting her a Bible. They weren't able to do that while I was there, but I think that they like had someone who was supposed to be in charge of that. But also I was surprised on our house visits the number of wives that were believing, but their husbands weren't believing, and that was just so hard for them because sometimes they weren't allowed to go to church because their husbands wouldn't allow them. But we went and visited them, and they still like got scriptures on their own time, and they were studying them, and that was encouraging too. And then probably the biggest moment that impacted me was we did a house-to-house visit, and we kind of beforehand we're like, okay, Grace, it's your turn to share your testimony because you haven't yet. And I was like, okay. So we go to the house, and one of the leaders was talking about the gospel, just kind of being an introduction, and then he was like, well, Gracie wants to share her testimony, is that okay? And the guy was like, yeah. And so I was sharing my testimony with him, and then we were reading scripture to him. And it was also one of those things that reminds you that our battle is not just against flesh and blood, because we were at a really like pivotal point in the conversation, and his entire family comes home with all the groceries, and everyone's like going around, the dogs are barking, and then everything quiets back down. And the guy, his name is Felipe, he says he wants to make a confession of faith. And so we're like, awesome, that's really great. And I'm thinking like, this is so cool, I'm standing right here. And the pastor goes, are you ready to die for Christ? And I was like, it's a little harsh to ask him like right then. But the guy was like, yeah, I'm ready. And so we stood up and we prayed with him. And while we were praying, his rooster started going like nuts. And it was like, be quiet. But so we prayed with him. And it was really awesome, but so I'm kind of one of the more skeptical people, like, oh, I can't know his heart, so I don't know if he was actually saved or not. And Mr. Schott was saying that you're right, you don't know his heart, and you don't know if he's saved or not, but you have to take his word for it and let God worry about if he's not. So we were like, okay, that's true, that's cool, and we prayed for him. And so the next day was church, and the translator drives me, and then there was like 3 other people in our group, 4 other people in our group, and 2 of the girls kind of took Spanish like in high school and college, so they kind of knew. So we're thinking Alex is going to drive us there, and he's like, we gotta follow up on this, so we're going to ask Felipe if he wants to come to church with us, give him a ride, because he was an older man, and so it was kind of a ways to walk. And so we're like, cool, let's go. So we all pile in the truck, and then we get there, and we all get out of the truck, and Alex is like, well, I'm going to go change my clothes in my house. I'll be back in 5 minutes. And so we're like, oh, okay. So Felipe was actually already on the way walking to church with his 2 sons, which was just goosebump moment for me. But then we had to like try and tell him Alex is coming back in 5 minutes, and we're like, Cinco minutos, Alex, car. And so we got it across to him, and he was like, oh, good. And so we asked him how old his sons were, and we're like, And then this guy rides by on a bicycle. He's like, he works at the airport. We're like, oh, bueno. So then Alex comes back, and we took him to church, and it was just one of those things. Not only did he come back to church that week, he was already walking back to church that day with his sons, but he came the day after that and the day after that. And so it was just one of those, it was amazing because I was kind of forced into being part of that sharing process. Not forced, like I wanted to, but I was afraid to. And it was just one of those things like God uses you if you let him. And so that was just really incredible to me. And of course, there's just sovereignty and the team unity, and we had small accountability groups, and it was just a time where we were able to share with each other, and someone in our group shared something, and it turned out the other girl was going through like the exact same thing, and so we were all able to share and pray for each other, and just it was an amazing time, and just the sovereignty of God is so awesome. So when I came home, it's just like you're so full of like everything. And before we left, Mr. Schott was telling us like you can't let it end here. This is not where it ends. And also you have to be ready to tell people about your trip, because this is an amazing door that God has used to open it. So he encouraged us to kind of get 3 main point type thing. But I was privileged to have an hour with you guys, so I was able to do a little bit more than that. But when I got back, someone asked me, what now? And I was like, oh, it was awesome. I want to go back, and I do want to go back. And she was like, oh, well, of course you want to go back, but what now? And I was just kind of like, well, I don't know, like what now? But it was one of those things. Now I need to go, and I need to do the same thing here. And I need to love people and share God's word here. And when we were getting ready to leave, one of our translators, Claudia, she was my El Salvadorian mom, we were praying with her, and Mr. Schott said, so we've come here, and you see how much we love your people, but they're your people, so how much more should you love them? And so that kind of spoke to me too, because I came back here, and I went over to a different country, and I loved people that I couldn't even understand. So how much more should I come back here and love my own people? So that's just, yeah, God is awesome. And Miss Kim's crying, and I haven't cried yet. So I'm just like waiting to explode. So, but I don't want that to happen. Anyways, so thank you guys for praying for me, and I really, I appreciate it, and thank you for all your support. And if anyone has any questions, that's cool too.
What surprised you the most?
What surprised me the most? Everything. No, I was really just surprised because I was surprised at the peace that God granted me and my family, because I really had no idea what we were doing when we got there, and I really had no idea who I was going with, and I really had I had no idea. So it was one of those things. I knew God wanted me to go on a missions trip this summer, but I had actually sent an application to SOS, and they hadn't written me back, so I just kind of took that as a no. And so I looked into going to a host family. I looked into my friend Josh's parents, and they were really helpful with that. And then it just kind of like nobody was at peace about it, so I decided to just like email SOS and be like, hey, remember me? And they were like, oh yeah, you're accepted. And I was like, oh, cool. So I had several friends that had gone on the trip before, and they were all like, yes, it's amazing. But I'm like, but what is it? And they're like, no, it's just amazing. And so I'm like, okay. So I was just surprised, I guess, at the peace that he gave me and my family. And then I was also surprised at just the amount of loss people in a place that like you don't necessarily think of as like, I don't know, I think of like tribes in Africa as never having heard the gospel before, but there were people that we visited in that mountain in Guatemala and in Honduras that had never heard the gospel before, like they'd never heard the name Jesus before. And so I was shocked at that, and I was just really encouraged by the work that SOS is doing there, because I know a lot of missions trips are glorified vacations, and they stay in resorts, and then they kind of walk into the other end of town. And it was one of those things like we were living it, and the people in charge were living it, and they lived it like all the time. So, the end. Anyone else?
What does SOS stand for?
SOS, I'm pretty sure, I'm 99% sure that it still just stands for Save Our Souls, but they're taking like the literal meaning, like saving people's souls.
Okay.
And, yeah. And a lot of people like come to these presentations and they like dress up like they would have on the trip, except I was wearing like athletic shorts and really sweaty t-shirts the whole time, so I felt like you guys didn't need to see that, so.
Thank you.
One more question.
Yes.
When, like you said, Felipe was on his way to church, where do they meet? Because they're not going to the Catholic Church.
No, oh, that reminded me of something too, thank you. They meet at different places. A lot of times they met at the place we were staying, which is La Esperanza, which is just the Hope Center, and it's not a church, but the multi-purpose room, which was where like all the guys slept at night, so they had to like pick up their mattresses and move all their junk into our room, like every time we were going to have church there. So that's where they had church, but also they have a couple of house churches, and one time we went to a church service, and it was just kind of like at this dead end of the neighborhood, and it was right by a soccer field, and I'm like, well, this is an interesting place for them to choose to have church. Like there's this huge group having soccer there, and so they set up like their speakers, and they have microphones and everything, and they do the church service, and come to find out later, there didn't used to be a soccer field there, but the Catholic Church found out that they were having church there, so they built it as a soccer field, but we got amplifiers, so they're hearing the word, so it was one of those things, God used what man intended for evil. It was good.